Hey, what's going on? I'm Mike Barker. On today's episode, CB750K projects. Gonna show you the best way to do an oil change. Yep. Knew I was gonna forget to do that. An easy compression test. And I'm gonna hopefully find out what the deal is with this low mileage engine. Air quotes. It's gonna be a good day. Had to get out of the garage for a minute. It's kind of loud and smoky. Yeah, so I'm gonna let that warm up for 8 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Stand out here in the rain. It's a nice night though. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and disconnect and move out of the way the brake light switch here. I'm also going to just back this nut out and take this bracket off for the rear brake light switch as well. Have your 12mm socket on hand. And now the next thing to do is to back off the drain plug for the oil reservoir. Just back it off a little ways though, because then what we'll do is we'll put the funnel right up underneath, undo it the rest of the way, catch all the oil down in the pan. That's pretty good. I'm gonna go grab some gloves just so I don't make a mess. All right, plugs out, away we go. And oh my goodness, this oil is black as the night. What a mess. Okay, so while I've got the oil reservoir draining, what I'm actually gonna do is move around and start draining the oil actually out of the crankcase. I've got a pretty low buck setup here. An old lunchroom tray, some cookie mix container that I just randomly had kicking around, and that's what I'm going to use to catch the crankcase oil. There's really not a lot that comes out. This should be more than adequate. And like I said, not much comes out of the crankcase where it's a dry sump. Oh, that sounds like we need to pee though. I'll be back. Okay, the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna use a 17mm socket, tighten up the reservoir drain bolt that I've already threaded in by hand. Okay, so here's another thing you should do. With the oil pan plug out, we're gonna kick over the engine a couple of times, obviously with the kill switch in the off position, just to pump the rest of the remaining oil out of the system. All right, 12mm socket is what we're gonna use to remove the oil filter housing. Yep. Knew I was going to forget to do that. Something makes me think that I have some parts that I bought for the next time I did this job. Ah. That'll do. Let's see. Nope. Oh, there's one. Magnetic oil drain plug. And oil filter washer gaskets. This stuff all came from vintage CB750. It was pretty quick shipping to get here. The price was fair. Kind of frustrating that as a Canadian citizen buying from a Canadian company, I had to pay in US dollars. That doesn't help. But the parts came quickly and they gave me a nice magnet. Meh, whatever. So over here on the bitchin' toolbox, I've disassembled what came out of my bike. This is important. This is what came out of my bike. This is the bolt that goes through the housing, that goes through the spring. That should go through a washer that was missing into the filter. This is a brand new filter. What I'm using is a Fram SOHC CB750K filter. Before you start whining about, oh my God, you're using a Fram filter, it was cheap. I bought it on Amazon. It gets the job done. I'm not anal about oil filters. Sorry. Again though, as I mentioned earlier, brand new package of 4 washers from VintageCB750.com. Super handy. So I went ahead and installed the O-rings that came with the oil filter kit. The first one, the smallest one, goes onto the housing bolt. You're going to want to pre-lube this with a little bit of oil first. Be careful getting it across these threads. The second O-ring is this larger diameter one, which goes in the housing. Again, little light coat of oil. Away we go. And the final thing that I'm going to do before I assemble this all back together is I like to actually apply a little bit of oil to the oil filter first, just as a pre-lube. My assumption is if I pre-lube this first, then there's already oil in the filter. Maybe it helps on startup. Actually, it's something that they recommend that you do when you're changing the oil in the newer RAV4s. It's an exchangeable element as well, so it recommends to pre-lube them. So anytime that I see a filter like this, I just go ahead and pre-lube it. What's the harm? Clearly, this is bike oil, as you can see by the bike on the bottle. But for some reason, I felt the need to write 1040 bike oil on the side of it, just so I was clear. Actually, the real reason I did this is I store all these bottles, like library book style, in my shelf like this. So by writing on this side what's actually in this, it's a quick reference, I can grab it and go. Bolt in the housing, spring on the bolt, washer on the spring, filter. Good to go. Just give this a little clean first. Try and find a clean spot on the dirty rag. This might have been a bad idea. And according to recommendations that I've seen, tighten this until it bottoms out, and then go an 1/8 of a turn. So now, all I have to do is replace the drain bolt with my new magnetic drain bolt and fill it back up with oil. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the bracket for the rear brake light and then reinstall the actual spring that connects the pedal to the brake light switch. There we go. All right, so now it's time to add some oil. For oil quantity that you want to add for a CB750K, you want to have 1, 2, 3 quarts of your finest liquid dinosaur. And in goes the last. And that is that. All right, the last thing to do before I start the bike up and let it actually run and warm up is I'm gonna turn the engine over a few times. You could do this in one of 2 ways. 1, use the electric start, just don't overdo it. And 2, use the kickstart like I did earlier. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the kickstart. All right, start it up, check for leaks. If we've got no leaks, job done. Oil change complete. Make sure you open the garage door so you can accomplish 2 things. 1, not die from all the fumes. 2, piss off your neighbors at 10 o'clock at night. Mission accomplished. A word of caution when you're working on these bikes, when that engine is hot. If you've got to pull spark plugs or you're trying to screw in a compression test gauge, you will burn your hand if you do not have gloves on. Can't see it much, that's dirt, but yeah, I scorched the side of my palm pretty good. Wear gloves, be safe, have fun on old bikes. Okay, next project, compression test. So the first thing that you're gonna wanna do here is disconnect all the spark plug wires and then remove all of the spark plugs. This is gonna allow the engine to turn over easier so we can get our compression reading. Just to keep things simple, we're gonna start with the number 1 cylinder. We're gonna insert the end of the compression tester that has the appropriate threaded fitting on it, matches your spark plugs. It's gonna go in here and we're gonna tighten it up. I need 2 hands though, so I gotta put the camera down. This should thread in nice and easy. You don't have to crank it in there, just lightly seat it. It's got an O-ring on it, so it doesn't take much to seal it up. So now, connect the gauge. And we're ready to do our test. So when we do this test, we're gonna crank the engine over at least 5 times. Basically, we're gonna stop when the needle stops moving. Ideally, you'd crank the engine over the exact same number of times for each cylinder. So if you crank it over 5 times on the number 1, you've got to crank it over 5 times number 2, 3, and 4. That's gonna be kind of hard to do here, so I'm just gonna watch the needle, see how high it goes, just to get a reading to see where I'm at. And you're gonna wanna make sure that you've got the throttle held all the way open for this test. So, cylinder number 1 is just a hair over 150. Okay, in the interest of time savings, you're basically gonna repeat the exact same steps for cylinders 2, 3, and 4. I'm not gonna bother showing you them. It's a pretty simple process. You can pick up the compression tester. Here in Canada, I got mine at Canadian Tire. But I'm sure any automotive parts supplier, O'Reilly's, Napa, any of those guys, you're gonna be able to find this thing. It's a pretty easy process. So, do the smart thing. Make sure you write down the compression test values for each cylinder so that you can compare them across all of the cylinders. All right, first time I've ever done a compression test. I've just never had any reason to do one on any of the cars I've ever owned. I suspected there might have been compression issues with this bike. It's old, I don't actually know the mileage, but it's got a claimed 14,000 original miles on it. And I don't know, the mileage might be right. It's just, I call it the green bastard because it's cobbled together. It looks like it's been some kind of an accident or something. Anyway, the mileage on the odometer could be correct because I just ran these numbers and it's 150 PSI across all 4 cylinders, cranking it 11 times each. And I checked it afterwards and 11 is about as many as you can go. That's the max compression value. I'm super happy about that. From everything that I've read, as long as your compression numbers are within 10% between all the cylinders, you're doing good. And I'm gonna have to double check on single overhead KM4's SOHC4.com, or .net. I'll correct that and put it down here. Those guys are an incredible resource. Yeah, I'm pumped. I think 150 is a decent number too. I'm gonna have to check though.